Obviously, there was already growing pains going in, trying to get used to playing with LeBron on a new team and a new system, then coming through an injury. And I think in Isaiah's mind, he's a human being. It has to affect him to look and say, I was literally one season away from making life-changing money for my family. Now, and it's not like Isaiah Thomas is making pennies, but when you have a $100 million deal and then you sign a $2 million deal, that's a huge difference in terms of his mind.
That's a big difference.
And I think that put a lot of pressure on him. Like, okay, I've got to get back. I've got to go out here and prove myself. I've got to try to show that I'm the player that I can be. So either Cleveland's going to reward me next year or some other team's going to come up and offer me a nice deal. And it just all fell apart. It was not a good mix. He wasn't healthy. He was pressing too much. There was always the pressure of playing on a team that has LeBron James on it. The spotlight's always on you. Again, we talk about recipes for disaster with Major League Baseball and the Steelers. Maybe that should be the topic of the show because that was another one. And I don't think probably Cleveland or anybody else even had an inkling of that when they brought him in. They just thought they were getting the guy that they had saw early in the playoffs when they faced him before his injury, a guy that even after the death of his sister went out and put up great performances to lead his Celtics, and then he gets hurt. I'm sure they thought they were getting that guy, not a guy that was hurt and a guy that was pressing to get his money. So again, Eric, it's a situation where now Isaiah, he's probably in the best situation personally for him, back with a coach that he likes, with a young organization that hasn't really won anything yet. They have something now that they can prove. Hopefully he gets a chance to have a really great year. Maybe Denver can sign him to a nice deal. Maybe someone else can get him, because I think Isaiah Thomas, he's proven himself as a very good player in this league. Unfortunately, it was just circumstances that led him to the situation that he's in. So we'll continue to follow this Isaiah Thomas story. There's still a handful of guys out there in the NBA that haven't been signed yet. Clint Capella comes to mind as a big name that's still out there. At some point, Eric, I want to have a conversation when we have more time about just the NBA and how they've developed this summer league now that's on ESPN, on NBA TV. You've got stars like LeBron showing up for it. It's constantly on ESPN, getting more coverage than even baseball, who's actually playing real games. So NBA has really done a great job dominating this summer. So we'll discuss that on a later episode. That'll do it for segment one. Well, if you're hearing that sound, that's something new for the show. That is breaking news. If you've been following along with the podcast up until this point, you know that Eric and I initially were recording this episode on Tuesday evening during the MLB All-Star game, but we awoke on Wednesday morning to the news of a massive story, a story that we've been following pretty much all season long, trying to figure out what was happening and how it was going to come to an end. And we finally have an answer, as the Spurs have traded All-Star guard Kawhi Leonard to the Toronto Raptors in exchange for All-Star guard DeMar DeRozan. Also included in the package, the Spurs will send Danny Green to the Raptors, and the Raptors will send Jakob Poeltl and a protected first-round pick back to the Spurs. This is a massive story, so post-production, Eric and I are going to put this in on Wednesday night. We're recording this now, so Eric can get this in for the Thursday episode. But, Eric, this was just too big of a story to not include in this podcast for this week. Again, a story that we've been following all season long. We know the pieces that are moving now. Do you like the moves that the Raptors made for this one-year rental? Because it sure seems like Kawhi Leonard has his heart set on heading to L.A.
It's very interesting because the Raptors, to me, have clearly said we are in a rebuilding process. And I know that anyone who has listened to the sports media all day on Wednesday, if you were in and out of your car, you were trying to listen to the different ESPN or Fox News shows that were on Sirius XM satellite radio, and maybe you had your TV on at work, you heard a lot of speculation about what does this move really mean for Toronto? Do they have any chance of keeping Kawhi at all? Certainly, it looks from the outside looking in that the answer is absolutely not. Kawhi, all reports point to the fact that he does not like this trade at all. So now, as we talked about a few weeks ago, he was going to be disgruntled in San Antonio. Apparently now he's going to be disgruntled in Toronto. Who knows what they're going to get out of Kawhi for this one-year season. But Justin, I don't think he's going to be able to stay there because I don't know what amount of money they would offer him at the end that's going to be worth it for him if he has his heart set on the Los Angeles area, whether that be the Clippers or eventually the Lakers to play with LeBron James and whoever he brings to that team over the next 12 months. So it's very odd from the Raptors standpoint, But you also, I mean, the Raptors, we said 3 years now, getting to the playoffs, getting deep runs into the playoffs, and then they just couldn't get over that hump anyway. And DeRozan was part of that. It didn't seem like DeRozan was going to be the guy that got them over that hump. Now, he's also not happy about being traded out of Toronto, primarily because it seems like he was told you wouldn't be traded. That didn't turn out to be true. But Justin, as to your question, it seems like Toronto's in a rebuilding mode. They don't intend to keep Kawhi past this year. I'm certain that they're going to try, but I doubt it'll happen. And so for them, it's a 1-year chance at another title run. If that doesn't happen, Kawhi's gone. They have to then make decisions on Kyle Lowry, some of the other pieces there, and then they go from there. As for the Spurs, well, they're going to rebuild with DeMar DeRozan and see where that takes them. But they certainly couldn't have Kawhi either because he was just unhappy no matter what.
I think you've got it with Toronto's part. I think what they're looking at is they've got 1 year to try to make a run at this thing. And if they're in the mix and if they're looking like a team that's going to challenge for the Eastern Conference, maybe they hold on to them and just ride it out and try to sell their program. If things start to go south and Kawhi's really unhappy and pouting, maybe before the trade deadline, they try to part with him, send him to the Lakers, send him to the Clippers, and go into rebuilding mode. I think the big piece for them was we talked about DeMar DeRozan in that playoff series with the Cavaliers where he fell apart. He got benched in the third quarter. He came back. He got ejected in the fourth quarter of game 4 when they got swept. It didn't seem like things were going well. It seemed like even if Dwayne Casey stayed on that team, there was going to have to be a lot of conversations when you have to bench one of your all-star players, your best player. It felt like this was a move for Toronto of let's go for it for 1 year, and then we're out from under 3 years and $83 million left on DeRozan's deal. Lowry then at next year would only have 1 year left on his deal that he signed for 3 years and $90 million. So then they can look at just a rebuilding project. So I think that's what they're positioning themselves. We make 1 year run. Maybe Kawhi, somehow Sai Ujiri can sell him on their program. If not, they're that much closer to the rebuild mode. I think that's what they're looking for. But from a Spurs standpoint, Eric, we talked about them trying to find a way to build leverage back into this, that they weren't going to be in a hurry. They were going to take their time to get a player of the quality of DeMar DeRozan. I think they did very well for what they were able to get back when Kawhi had all the leverage and had pretty much taken everything away from the Spurs by just saying he was going to LA. He wanted to go to LA. Well, Kawhi hasn't said, his representatives has. Kawhi apparently can't talk for himself, but he had kind of made it seem like the Lakers were the only team that he wanted to go to, maybe the Clippers. The Spurs came out, asked for a huge amount of assets from those Lakers. They balked at it. Now all of a sudden it seemed like, well, where were the Spurs going to go find a trade partner? And Eric, I think they did a pretty good job.
I totally agree. I can't argue with that at all because DeMar DeRozan was the 11th ranked scorer in the league last year. This guy isn't a bad player. Now he, seems to suffer some LeBron challenges in the playoffs. And funny thing is now he's in the Western Conference and
might get eliminated again by LeBron.
That's right. So how that turns out, we have to see. But yes, you're right. The Spurs were backed into a corner by Kawhi Leonard, by a player who didn't want to be there. Now he's gone. You get an opportunity to have another young star. DeRozan he's not an old player. He's only 28, 8 years in the league. So certainly the younger side of what they would call a veteran player heading into his prime. He was putting up 23, 24 points on average per game last season. Not a bad scorer at all. It's going to be about how does he mesh with Aldridge and some of the other pieces that they have there. We know Tony Parker's gone. What is the Spurs rebuild mode like? But you're right. If you're going to ship off a guy like Kawhi Leonard, you had to get a piece back that was at least... Now, Kawhi's probably the second or third best two-way player in the game when he was playing, behind LeBron and certainly Kevin Durant. And those the guys that you would think they can pour in 40 points and they can play some defense. DeRozan's not a great defender, certainly not bad, but again, he's a name. He's at least a name that you're getting back. And that was my whole thing with the Spurs, is you can't just give away Kawhi. You've got to get something in return. And Justin, I agree. If this is what they were able to get when they were a little bit hamstrung and hand-tied, I think it's not a bad deal for them.
And look, DeMar DeRozan's probably never played with a coach of the pedigree of a Greg Popovich. So maybe Popovich elevates his game. He takes him from being a mediocre defender to maybe average to above average. Maybe DeRozan will play harder there. He'll find a home there. it just seems like for what was going to be offered to them, when you saw some of the deals that even the Sixers were putting together with players like Covington and protected first-round picks, and it seemed that their core plus Fultz were untouchable. So you started to kind of look through those deals. The Celtics, their top five, their big five guys were all untouchable. And you start to look at those players left. It seemed like the Lakers really weren't in the market to try to get rid of any of their young guys, where we talked about the patience of LeBron this time around to say, okay, I'll be more patient because I don't want to strip us of our core for 1 year with Kawhi when we're going to need Ingram or Kuzma or Hart on this roster because we need depth to go after teams like the Lakers. So I think from the standpoint of what the Spurs were able to get, that's where I really look at it and say you've got an all-star guard, you've got a proven scorer, plus they got rid of Danny Green's contract. Danny Green he's been a good defender for them, but he didn't have that great of a year last year. So you get out from under that money. They'll get out from under the Gasol money, I believe, next year. So it just opens up more opportunity for the Spurs to continue to re-sign. They lost Kyle Anderson to the Memphis Grizzlies earlier just because they really didn't have a lot of cap flexibility because of some of their deals with Gasol, Patty Mills, Danny Green. Now they've brought in a young player. They have him under contract for 3 years. And look, we talked about DeRozan being the asset that Toronto could trade. So if it doesn't work out in San Antonio, Eric, there's 15 teams plus next year that are going to have $20 to $25 million, if not more, money in cap room sitting there where the Spurs can start to wheel and deal next year, maybe find pieces that connect better if DeRozan doesn't work.
Yeah, and I'll have to say that I'm actually, in retrospect, happy that the Sixers kind of held their ground and didn't give up younger pieces or future picks or things like that for a guy in Kawhi who, although I would have loved having him there for his potential to help the Sixers get to the NBA Finals out of the East, if it would be truly a one-year rental, as a Sixers fan, I would be happy about the fact that they didn't go ahead and sell the farm just to try something with Kawhi. So I'm actually really happy about that. I do got to ask you, though, Justin, does this change anything for the Spurs' outlook for the playoffs and the Raptors' outlook for the playoffs going into this season?
Well, if Kawhi's engaged, I would think you would have to say they got better, that Toronto got better with getting Kawhi in there. Now, what Kawhi are we going to see? Are we going to see the Kawhi of 2 seasons ago where he was a top 3 finalist for MVP? Or are we seeing a guy who's going to have a lot of rust for not playing a year and a guy who's trying to preserve himself to hit the market next year or to go to LA or wherever he decides that he wants to do? That'll be the big question that Toronto has to figure out. But if Kawhi's engaged and he's back to that level, then I think Toronto, now with LeBron out of the East, they could actually be a serious contender to get to the Eastern Conference Finals. For the Spurs, I don't really know what they will do. I think based on the team that they had last year, what they were able to put on the court, if you can add some scoring pop from DeRozan that they have, I think they can probably be around that same area that they were last year, maybe slightly above that, fighting in that 5, 6, 7 range for seeding for the playoffs. So I think for both teams, it worked out well. It wasn't going to be pretty. Kawhi was never going to put on a Spurs uniform again. Even if they didn't trade him, he wasn't suiting up for them. That was just going to get ugly. They had to make this move. DeRozan can't be happy with the situation that he got put in, but I think if he goes down into that system with Popovich and he gets accustomed to that, San Antonio, again, it's not a big market, kind of similar to what Toronto is, but the fan base will embrace him down there, I think. So I think for both players, it'll probably work out. For Toronto as a team, like we said, I think for them, it's looking forward because, Eric, I just cannot see Kawhi Leonard, no matter what kind of push that the Raptors give him. I can't see him pulling a Paul George and signing back with them next year. I think he's either Laker bound or maybe Clipper bound if Jerry West gets him in a room and can sell him on their program.
Final question I have for you, because I actually don't know the rules about this. There's not very often that you have to know the rules about this. Can Toronto trade DeMar DeRozan to the Lakers this year?
I believe after the trade deadline, he can. He didn't sign a new deal with them. He was traded over. So I believe up until the trade deadline, he can. That question came up last year with a guy like George Hill that they had to wait longer because he had signed with Sacramento from Utah. So they have to wait for those deals to go further into the year to be able to trade those type of players. But I believe in a trade situation, from what I've heard on Wednesday, just listening to a lot of speculation that's out there, that again, if things would start to go south and Toronto wants to pull the parachute out on this thing and send him to the Lakers for anything just to recoup something with either youth or draft pick, something like that, and the Lakers ensure themselves of the guy that they want, it seems like all systems can be go for that.
Yeah, it just feels like if there's going to ever be a possibility of collusion in the NBA, this would be the time, because if we see 2 months from now that Kyle Kuzma and Josh